All right, well, thanks so much. We are going to jump in and get started. So today we're going to be talking about contract to close, and I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen. Let me know, you guys on Zoom, that you can actually see that screen. Is that a yes?
It just came on. Yes. Yep.
Perfect. All right, so this is in the Google Drive training folder, so if you want to access it later, I went ahead and I took out the old one and put in the new one here. You guys are not on my screen, so please just interrupt if you have questions, and then I will, just unmute yourself because I can't see you if you're putting stuff in the chat. So please just go ahead and unmute and ask whatever question that you have. Malene, would you close that? Thank you. All right, so a couple things. We all know that getting the client to the sale is not an easy journey sometimes, and this goes for both buyers and sellers. So as we go through these steps, most of these things are pertaining to both sides of the transaction or intermixing, somewhere. And I'll define what's what when we're at each step. Just because there are some things as a listing agent that you still can do even when you're representing the seller. So for example, when we have our buyer turning in earnest money as a listing agent, you should also be verifying that that got turned in. So that's still on your checklist too. Making sure that the buyer made loan application is not just the buyer's agent's responsibility. When you're representing your seller, you want to make sure that buyer is still on track. So you actually absolutely have the right to contact the lender to make sure if you're not getting your answers from the buyer's agent. So we're going to just go through those and I'll define, what might be specifically for one side or the other. I also created at the end of this PowerPoint here an actual checklist so that you don't have to use the PowerPoint as your guide, but an actual checklist. So that's been uploaded into the training folder under contract to close. All right, so I will tell you, most transactions have some bumps in the road. There's lesser that are just easy peasy smooth, right? So there's always going to be some different combination of things that go on during a transaction. So there's just endless things. We can't cover all the bases, but I will tell you this. It could potentially be harder to hold a deal together than coming to a sale. So I always like to tell, like a for sale by owner, if they say, well, what do I need you for to market the house? I already found a buyer. Well, what you need me for is to negotiate the contract and then hold it together. So a lot of work comes in at this point. So let's just move on. And I would love for everybody to have this checklist somewhere handy, because nothing like when you're in a transaction not knowing what to do. I don't check in on you and say, hey, Matt, how's this transaction going? Right. So I expect that you guys know to go back and look at this or just watch this recording again if you need to. But all right. So immediately after the contract is accepted, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, we're going to juggle back and forth here. And really in the first 24 hours, I'll give you a little bit of a cushion if it's a Saturday night, right? Like by Monday morning, there's some things that should be happening. However, there are some immediate things. And I know we talked about this maybe on Monday, which was this. What constitutes a pending or under contract? We just talked about this on Monday. What constitutes an under contract?
If the buyer has offered and the seller's accepted as is, so they have to sign, right? But once they receive it, once you send it.
There's what I'm getting for. Delivery.
Yeah.
It is not a contract until upon delivery. I know that was one of the test questions in the pool of test questions. When is a sale really a sale? And it's upon delivery. So let me give you an example of that. You write an offer, it gets accepted, like you're saying, and the seller signs it, or it gets negotiated and we've got initials or we re-sign the document, that kind of thing. But until you actually send a copy of that back to your client, don't make the assumption that they created a .loop account. When you share documents with them, it does prompt them, create your account so you can log in and, have access. Or they can just use that email all the time to get into those documents. Maybe they downloaded them. Don't assume that they set up a .loop account, which would then show them the updates in that loop. We need to share those signed documents back with our client, whether it be the buyer or the seller, once everything has been fully signed. And like I don't have a preference with, I'll tell you with my contracts, I don't do the strike through. It makes no sense because anything that you're doing to the document when it's a dot loop document, if it's not a flat PDF, is going to delete signatures anyway. So there's a history in dot loop that you can find those documents if you should go back and need to look at the history of that offer going back and forth. But if I'm changing the price, it's deleting signatures anyway. So then we need to resign. The only way you're going to be initialing is if you download that document as a flat PDF and then you have to strike through and put initials. Make sense? So it's upon delivery. Once you have it accepted, if it's your listing, you need to immediately change the status on the MLS to under contract. So let's talk about that path here for a second. On the MLS, as a listing agent, you go into edit and you're going to change it to under contract, either allow showings or not allow showings. The difference is this, are there contingencies? So if there's, and there's a lot of different types of contingencies, that does not mean it's contingent on the sale of the buyer's house. I mean, if it does, then by all means, say contingent, and it's going to ask, what is the contingency in a box over here? And then you're going to say, on the sale of the buyer's house or some other type of contingency. But typically, rather, unless it's cash, it's going to be contingent on financing. And then if there's any inspections, it's contingent on inspections. So it's going to sit in that status until those contingencies have been released. So you've come to terms on the home inspection and they've released that contingency with an ROC, whether or not there's repairs, doesn't matter in regards to the status. Financing contingency is not going to be met until you have clear to close. And at that point, you're going to go in the MLS and you're going to change it from under contract, allow showings, to under contract, no showings. You will not be able to get to closed when you go to change that status to closed if you did not take that path. So I get a lot of agents calling me saying, I'm trying to change the status to close, but it doesn't have a closed box. There's no close as an option. I immediately always know, oh, you didn't switch it to under contract, no showings, because then that box will pop up to sold.
So you could do that immediately. Like if you go to no showings and then that would pop like with
Yeah.
the same screen. But
Correct.
You just have to make sure.
Yeah. So like, let's just say you go, I mean, clear to close isn't usually happening right before a closing date. Like it's at least 3 days for sure. But probably more. But yes, you can do that. And if you don't in particular get your status changed to close for more than a few days, you can get flagged and you will be fined. Rich will get an email saying, how do you have all these under contracts that have been like this for 60 days? That's a red flag. And it's mostly because the agents forgot to change the status to sold or under or closed. So make sure that's really important because you can, and we have agents who have gotten fined for that reason. Let me also be clear. Once you have been flagged and fined, they watch you now. So then you're going to be audited to send in your listing paperwork and things like that by the MLS. So don't make those mistakes. All right. So we then have to get that signed contract to the buyer seller, the buyer's agent, the listing agent. Obviously, we're going back and forth, and then to the title company, and then also to the lender if you represent the buyer. Obviously, if you represent the seller, it's the buyer's agent's job to send the documents to the buyer's lender. You don't need to send things like your consumer guide. You don't need to send the anti-fraud. You don't need to send the things that are just a disclosure that has nothing to do with this specific transaction. So the rule of thumb is this. If it pertains to this offer, typically that would mean the address is on the contract, right? Then that needs to go to the lender and title company. You're not hurting anybody's feelings if you send the consumer guide and the anti-fraud and other things like that. But when you're submitting an offer back and forth with a listing agent, I chuckle when someone sends me an offer and they've sent me their anti-fraud, their consumer guide, their buyer's agency agreement. That's not meant for my eyes. That's only meant for you and your client. So keep in mind what documents need to go to the title company and the lender. Typically the purchase agreement, the agency disclosure, any other disclosures like property disclosure, lead-based paint disclosure, home warranty application or waiver, and any addendums that were with that offer. Like if it was an, appraisal gap or any of those kinds of things, right? Those are what goes to the other party. If you didn't pick the title company and the other agent did, then you need to find out who the contact person is from the agent who chose the title company, so that we make sure that we're communicating with the correct person at the title company if it's not our title company, right? If it is American Title Solutions and you are not a partner, well, I guess it doesn't matter if you're not a partner or not, you need to know who your person is. So American Title has a team of people who work with different agents, and it's by your letter of your last name. So you don't just send it out to no one or just anyone. You have to find out who's your person and who's your team, and then that's the connection that you make. And then you'll need to pass on that information to the other agent as well. And that goes for whether you represent the buyer or the seller. We need to announce who we are and what do they need from us, right? Then we need to make sure that the earnest money is deposited. Let me be clear, earnest money is not a requirement, but it's highly suggested that there's earnest money. Just because it's not a requirement doesn't mean that I would be telling buyers, oh, it's not a requirement, we don't need to do it. I mean, I'll be honest, as a listing agent, I'm going to instruct my seller that we're going to counteroffer wanting earnest money. It makes your offer look weak. It means that the buyer doesn't want to put any skin in the game.
The computer.
That they might. Hey guys, someone's not muted. Then it makes me feel like, as a listing agent, and I'm certain my seller, like the buyers could, back out anytime and they've got nothing to lose. So I strongly suggest that's on there, but also this, making sure they turned it in. And if it's American Title, they can go on the website and click, it says right here, deposit earnest money. And then they can just deposit it online, or they can deliver a check. I'm not accepting a check for earnest money to turn in on someone's behalf. They need to do it themselves. I'm not really interested in touching their earnest money. As Keller Williams, as a brokerage, we do not hold earnest money. So it should never be to the brokerage here, whether you represent a buyer or seller. It's not us, but other brokerages do. So keep this in mind. If you're a listing agent and you have an offer from, let's just say Cutler does hold earnest money, and their purchase agreement, when they write an offer on your listing, could say that the buyer's broker is going to hold the earnest money. It's not in your client's best interest. So I would counter with that and say, no, the title company. The title company is the impartial middleman. We don't want the other side of the transaction holding the other client's earnest money. That's not going to make it easy for us to be able to get that earnest money if there should be a breach of contract. Okay. If you represent the buyer or the seller, you should be contacting the title company and make sure that got turned in ASAP. Be very mindful when you are the listing agent and you're having to decipher other brokerages' contracts. They are not the same. Some of them are shorter, some of them are a lot more pages, and they don't always say the same stuff. We've got basic stuff in Ohio that we have to have on our contracts, but for example, and I don't remember who it is now, but one of the brokerages in town doesn't even have a line for seller to contribute blank towards buyer's closing costs. So here's what happens. They slip it in somewhere in a text box that's real easy to miss because it's not real evident. We tend to look at those blank boxes, right? Because that's how our contract's set up, which makes sense. We have a really good contract, I promise. Other brokerages do not. And so the last thing you want is to have got your seller to agree to this offer, and over here in the fine print, it says that the seller's crediting $7,000 towards their closing costs. So you really need to look at those kinds of things. A little bit harder when you're working with the seller because you're having to really dive in deep with that paperwork. Also know other brokerages have certain disclosures that we might not have, and vice versa. So that's not an unusual thing. It's not probably going to hurt your client to sign that disclosure. Certainly wouldn't necessarily be required, but there's no reason not to. So like our ABA needs to be signed by both the buyer and the seller if we're using our title company. And it can't be on two different documents. So we need to always disclose that. So you would have gotten maybe our ABA signed when you listed the house. That's fine. You're now in compliant. If you're using a different title company, we don't need the buyer to sign it, right? We've already done what we had to do, which was disclose it. A simple call to the title company, did the earnest money get turned in? One of the many reasons why we like to use American Title Solutions is because we don't even have to do that, because they email us. Just want to let you know we received the earnest money. They're constantly updating us. I've got a transaction right now, and I had to go with someone else's title company, and I haven't been in any kind of communication with them since the day I sent them the paperwork. So I have no idea what's going on unless I ask. So don't assume all things are going to be the same in that respect. Making sure that the client knows about earnest money, what it's for, how much it's going to be, and where it's going to go. Don't just assume they know that. You need to be specific if you're representing the buyer. Hey, our title company can do it online. Just go to their website. Or if you want to drop off a check, here's our address, kind of a thing. I can tell you there's a couple of things that cause agents to get in trouble, and earnest money's up there in the top things. Mishandling of earnest money. And not getting it turned in is mishandling of the earnest money. It's not just I lost their check. It's that you didn't verify that it got turned in. And it could be an oversight on the buyer's part, or it could just be they're like, I'm not gonna. And then we have a problem. In any case, moving on, then we want to make sure that the buyer makes loan application. So how we're going to do that is we're communicating with our lending partners. Again, another benefit of working with our people is you already are communicating with them. When it's some other place, someplace else, an online bank or a bank down the road or somebody's credit union, they may not be communicating with you. You might have to do the outreach. So therefore, you need to check when you're representing the buyer that they made loan application. Our contract says 5 days. Most contracts do say 5 days. So that means that once they get that under contract, they can shop around if they want, but they need to have made loan application. Part of making loan application is also having the order of the appraisal go in. So we're going to talk about that here in a second.
To do for the self-pay.
And so if I'm the listing agent, I'm going to be checking in with the buyer's agent and say, hey, Brittany, did your client turn in their did they make loan application? Do you know, in fact, they did, or do I need to check back with their lender? So yeah, you absolutely have the right to contact the lender and say, did they make loan application? Yep. You're not asking for any kind of insider trading information. Yes.
Just real quick, going back to the earnest money.
Go ahead.
So we just had a situation where that was the case where it wasn't ever sent, and we delivered the closing disclosure with
It credited.
earnest money.
Yeah.
And credited. Long story short is it threw us out of compliance, so we had to wait 3 days because
Oh.
we hadn't disclosed,
Sure.
and we had to ask for an extension.
Yeah.
So,
Little things.
and everything worked out, everything's fine, but to prevent that or not have that happen is huge. Because then you've got all sorts of questions to ask. You have the possibility that you could lose the house.
You're in breach. The buyer's in breach then. They really are. So, and as a buyer's agent, that was sort of your responsibility to make sure your client did it. And as a listing agent, I don't want to say to my seller, oh my gosh, Mrs. Seller, I'm so sorry. I didn't double check to make sure they turn their earnest money in.
Right. And when they're large earnest money,
Yeah.
it's over 1,000
Sure.
typically, it can throw our percentages off because it's so tight.
Yeah.
So like this particular one was a $3,000 earnest money, which
Oh,
is a
gosh.
larger earnest
Yeah.
most, but when a $190,000 loan, I think it was 3,000 is
A
a
lot.
good portion.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that because that is key because we don't check on that.
Sure. Yeah, you just assume the contract says it, so you just assume that it does.
Right.
It's the agent's job. It
Yeah.
is.
So I agree with that.
Yeah, no problem. Questions about any of that? Anybody on Zoom? All right, moving on. Step 2, schedule inspections. So I will say maybe there's sort of a right or wrong. In my opinion, there's one way to do it, and that's let the client schedule the inspections. I don't want to do it for them. I don't want to say, Jake, you know what? Let me go ahead and call my inspector that you're going to use, and I'm going to schedule this for you. Couple things happen when you do that. If the client doesn't come to the inspection and they never pay the inspector, you, the agent, are the one who scheduled this inspection. They're coming for you to give them the money. I don't want to pay for someone's inspection because they got cold feet. So I give out whoever I'm recommending for the inspections. If they ask, even if they don't ask, I'll say, hey, do you know who you're going to be using? I can give you a name or two. or 3 or 1. And then you can contact them and see if that's who you want to use. Please let them know the dates that you're available, see what they've got available, and then please let me know, because then I, as the listing agent, I'm going to call the buyers, sorry, as a buyer's agent, I'm going to call the listing agent and say, can we do it at 2 o'clock on Saturday? That's how that chain goes. So you represent the buyer, you need to call the listing agent like you're scheduling a showing basically, and say, can we get the, inspector in there on this day and time? The listing agent's probably going to expect someone's going to be there with the buyer. That means you or somebody that you send in your place if you're not going to be there. You should absolutely be at your inspections for at least the beginning and the end. If you have to leave in the middle for a minute, that's okay. But you should definitely be there. It also is a great learning experience. When you've been to multiple home inspections, you learn so much along the way. It's definitely preferable that the client be there at the home inspection. So this is one of those situations where I'm going to say, in my experience, more deals fall through from inspections when the buyer did not attend the home inspection. Because when they're there, they're having their conversation with the, inspector, and they're explaining things to them. When that doesn't happen and all they get is this 40-page printout and it says all these random things that are wrong with the house, which could just simply be there's a loose cabinet drawer or whatever, it looks worse on paper than it does when you're standing there. I'll give you an example. I sold a house 2 years ago, sight unseen, to a buyer who was moving back here from Florida. There was a little spot on the basement block wall that was about this big, little bit like the size of a 50-cent piece. I don't know if you guys can see me on Zoom since I got that camera off. It wasn't very big, but the photograph of it made it look like the size of a watermelon. And when my client saw the picture, he was like, what's this huge wet spot on the wall? And I'm like, huge? It's like the size of a 50-cent piece, It just looked worse. So that's an extreme example, but things just look worse. I was able to, have him understand. I may have FaceTimed him when I was there so he could actually see the proportion of it. But reading the words is definitely harder for them to get through than standing there with the inspector and questions being answered or things being explained to them. Not everybody wants to walk around with the inspector. Not every inspector wants you to walk around with them. That can be decided at the house. By the way, the home inspection is not necessarily a place for their family and friends to start piling in. If I'm a listing agent and I get a phone call from my seller so mad because there's 15 cars in the driveway and they weren't expecting that many people there, we're going to have a problem. So if you have like, oh, the kids didn't get to see the house at the showing, can we bring them at the home inspection? Ask. Most of the time someone's going to say yes, but just ask. Questions about that? So when you schedule the inspection, meaning your client schedules the inspection, that would most often be the buyer. It's a rarity that a seller is paying for and scheduling inspections. Not very often. In my 28-year experience, I can't even think of a time that the seller paid for any inspections. It's not that it's not required of the buyer to pay for it. It's obviously on our contracts for a reason, which means it's negotiable, but I don't know a lot of sellers who are going to be willing to pay for inspections on the behalf of a buyer. But again, it is negotiable. So we also need to know when we're selling a house, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, what county are we in and what's the requirements in regards to inspections? Some counties up north, they do expect certain kind of inspections, and there's also specific cities that do. The one that always comes to mind for me is Lakewood. Lakewood requires some city inspections of the house on top of a home inspection or instead of or in addition to, whichever. You need to know that when you sell a house there. Thank you. And you can just set it down. We'll divide them up later. No worries. Thank you. But more importantly, because we're probably not selling houses in Cuyahoga County, there is no required home inspection. Not even if they go FHA, not even if they go VA. Don't get confused with the appraisal and the inspection. A home inspection is a home inspection. An appraisal is in someone coming in to appraise value. And when it's a certain kind of a loan, for example, VA and FHA, they have what's called an overlay, which says it needs to be on this checklist inspected. So that appraiser, not an inspector, is looking to make sure there's no peeling paint, making sure all the windows open, making sure that there's railings where there needs to be, and so on. They are not inspectors. They are probably not getting on the roof, and they're not checking the hot water heater and all those things. So also don't think, oh, it's FHA, so we don't have to do a home inspection. Not the same. However, lender required repairs are going to be required. So that means that appraisal can come back and say, we need these 3 things fixed. With an FHA loan, the buyer can fix them. With a VA loan, they cannot. So again, that becomes negotiable. Know your counties and whether the property has well and or septic. Certain counties have different regulations. If you're selling a house there, it's your responsibility. Listen, guys, you decided to come into real estate. I'm pretty sure over the age of 18, it's your responsibility. It's not the other agent's responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's not the brokerage's responsibility. It's your responsibility to know where you're doing real estate at. So you need to investigate. We don't have some master list that's because it's moving parts. It's always changing. In any case, actually, that's not true. I'm pretty sure American Title has something that says counties and what inspections are required, but it's not necessarily always updated. So I can tell you in Stark County, well inspection is not required. Septic inspection is required, but not at closing. It's required within 6 months of the closing. So if your buyer's okay with moving forward on this transaction without that inspection, the county's coming knocking on the door and they're going to put an eviction note on that house if they haven't gotten their inspection done within 6 months. Summit County is point of sale. So understand when you're in Summit County, what things are point of sale? Well and septic, for example. They will not close the transaction without them. Required repairs when it comes to septic are going to be required. Required replacement means it has to. Dane in our group has a situation right now where the septic failed. Part of the reason is because the homeowner poured their patio over top of the cleanouts. And who knows when they did that, right? That it needs replaced. And so now they're negotiating how this is going to be paid for because it's not cheap. Landscape could need to be redone, making sure when you're writing that ROC, you know exactly what you're doing. If you say seller to replace septic system, but you don't say have to fix the lawn afterwards, then they're not. Don't make assumptions like that. And other surrounding counties have different rules in regards to well and septic. Those are pretty expensive fixes or replacements. If anything, even when you're up against multiple offers, I would say you highly want to recommend those when you're not in a county that requires it. But you got to know what to expect that too. Questions about inspections there? I'm also going to say this and we'll move on from inspections. I always have a conversation with my buyer that looks a certain kind of a way and my seller looks a certain kind of way before inspections happen. With my seller, the conversation is going to be like this. Hey, Malene, the inspector is going to come on Saturday at 2:00. Does that time work for you? And you should not be there. It could take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. It could be a little shorter, or it could be a little longer. I'll make sure that the agent lets me know when they're leaving and I can let you know. Do not go back home. Do not. We don't want our sellers to run into the inspector and the buyer. This is not a chit chat session now. Bad things happen when buyers and sellers start to collaborate. I don't know why. They all want to like each other. You'd think it would be, but the seller starts to say stupid stuff like, oh, I'll fix that. I'll fix that. I'll fix that. Well, that maybe isn't what we wanted you to fix. It's very hard for a seller to have people digging into their house like that. They should not be there. Matter of fact, if I represent a buyer and the seller is going to be there, I'll say, we're canceling the inspection until we can find a time that your seller's not there. Now, one second. I've had it happen. They're both 90 years old. They're both on oxygen. They cannot leave. There are always exceptions like that, but it shouldn't be busybody seller just wants to see what's happening. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, the inspection side, get you cross-country song a little bit. Hey, we do loans in all counties, so we know.
Yeah.
Another thing is we have an appraisal management company that is owned by Cross Country. So if you're in a situation where you don't feel warm and fuzzy about something that may come up in the appraisal, please contact me, send me a photos. I will reach out with you to the appraisal management company and say, hey, Brandon, here's the situation that we have. What do you think?
Yeah.
And then that will prevent a lot of things.
Yeah. Because like, for example, If there's something obvious that you see at the house that we think could be an appraisal issue, it's a good idea to ask, is this gonna be a problem? And can the seller maybe get it taken care of before the appraisal comes
You
out?
get ahead, you try to get.
Exactly.
So that you're not in.
Paying twice. Well, get behind, because then the appraiser has to go back out to make sure that it got done. But also, the buyer's then gonna pay for a re-inspect.
Right.
It's not as expensive as the initial one. What's the going rate these days?
$75 for reinspection.
Yeah.
That's like 600, depending between 550 and 650 on the appraisal.
Right, yeah.
If it's conventional, I think, Jay.
And for some strange reason, the buyers tend to think that the seller should have to pay for that re-inspect. They aren't. They aren't expected to. They usually don't. It's not that it's not negotiable, but
Very, very rare.
it's very rare. Yeah. What I tell my sellers in preparation is be out of the house and understand what's going to happen. And then I also let them know we may not get a copy of the report. I don't know why sellers want to see it. They sometimes expect that they're getting it, but you don't want it. Now you got to disclose this stuff. Do you really want to know that? And also how the negotiation of repairs may happen. The more important conversation is really with the buyer. This is not a free-for-all. This is not, oh, we thought we were buying a brand new house and we wanted it to be. For someone who just built a brand new house, it ain't perfect. There's going to be things. So I explained to the buyer, hey, listen, Matt, the inspection is going to happen on Saturday. It could take somewhere around 2 to 3 hours. You know, I hope you and your wife are going to be there. I will be there. And what we're looking for is called material latent defects. And let me define what that means. A material latent defect is something that we could not have seen just by looking at the house at our showing. We did not go in the attic. We did not get on the roof. We did not check the hot water or all these other things. But that also means this. We drove up the driveway, which was cracked. That is not a material latent defect. We saw it. We saw that. When we made our offer, technically, we should have said, boy, this driveway's a mess. We should account for that in our offer. You did not. It doesn't mean that they can't ask for the gutter to be replaced that we saw hanging when we wrote our offer, but I will tell you that's not a material latent defect. We also want to look at what's expensive. What's going to cost you more than $500 in the next year? We aren't going to get nitpicky about every leaky faucet that's one drip every 25 seconds, right? That's not really a material latent defect. And we don't want to get caught up in the weeds of all the tiny little things. And I can also tell you this, sellers strangely are more willing to spend thousands of dollars on a very large repair than they are spending a couple $100 on a bunch of little stuff. Because it starts needling them to death. And it starts to be like, oh my gosh, we lived here. What's the big damn deal? You know, so it agitates the situation.
Just so I'm understanding, right, whenever they do that, if they send whatever, the leaky drain, for example, opens the seller up to shutting the whole deal.
So let's talk about that. So thank you for bringing that up. All things must be equal on both sides. You can't have a situation on a transaction where somebody's holding the other person hostage and vice versa, right? So when you write a repair addendum or an ROC, release of contingency, and you're asking for repairs, that is reopening negotiations of the contract. So that means that the seller can also renegotiate. They can say, you know what? Yep, we'll go ahead and we'll pay the $25,000 to replace the roof, but now I want 10 more thousand for the price of the house. Like lots of things can start to get renegotiated. Or the seller could say, hey, you know what? We got a backup offer the very night we went under contract and their offer's better. And so now we're just sitting and waiting for your buyer to ask for some stupid repairs and the seller can void the contract. So it's not a threat to your buyer, but you should know that that's absolutely legal. I'm not doing these 25 things that they're asking for. So not only am I saying no and rejecting that, I'm just going to void the contract. And then imagine that you get a mutual release back. And then your client's like, what the hell is this? So you've got to keep them under control. It doesn't typically happen. And I'll also say why. Most agents don't know that. And that's okay. That's okay. Also this. If there's an initial missing on a page of a contract, you don't have a fully signed contract. If your buyer did not initial page 3 of the property disclosure, you do not have a fully signed contract. Everything has to be signed. And if you have, this happens, and I don't want to get too far off track about disclosures, but if it's an investor or a flip or something like that, or even if it's like, that was mom and dad's house and I never lived there even as a kid, or even if I grew up there and it's 40 years later, that is not an exemption from a property disclosure. You need to look at the property disclosure exemption form and the 7 things that are on it. I think there's 7. And if they're not one of those, then they're not exempt. If they are one of those, we use the property disclosure exemption form. Definitely, it's a required document. The lender's going to need to see a RPD or an exemption. Don't let the other agent say we don't have an exemption. Or here's my blank property disclosure. I love this, where they draw an X through it, or at the top they say seller never lived there. That is not a filled out property disclosure. Do not let your client sign a blank property disclosure just because the seller didn't live there. If they're not exempt, then they have to fill it out. They can say unknown and no to everything. I don't understand this practice with some agents that think that because it's a flip house that they don't have to fill it out. Sure, if it's owned by a business, that's a different story. But if we can't get them to fill it out and sign it, then what you need to understand is this is not a fully signed contract. So we are in jeopardy of this deal falling apart at any time during the process. Doesn't mean it will, but it could. So my buyer could say, you know what, I got buyer's remorse and I don't want to buy this house. They would not be in breach of contract if nobody signed the property disclosure or there's an initial missing. Okay, so keep that in mind.
Work. I've had 2 showings so far where we got close to writing an offer where the sellers had already had a home inspection done so that they could do selling as is.
Sure.
How does that work? Because then you as a buyer,
You don't have to, because also this, it's so funny. In the state of Ohio, every house is sold as is. So when the agent that's listing the house puts in remarks sold as is, it's redundant. We already know what you're basically sending as the message is that your seller is not going to negotiate any repairs. Here's what I know. When we're 2 weeks into the transaction and the seller has found a house they want to move into, and then we have an inspection, it doesn't matter that they said it as is. That doesn't mean that your buyer doesn't have the right to still ask for repairs. And most of the time, the seller still does them.
So if it's in the inspection though, like, so if
It's irrelevant.
Does that mean that the buyer shouldn't ask for something because it's been disclosed? No, that's okay.
Because they don't have to accept that inspection report.
Yeah, and that's what I've had them
Yeah.
talk about doing another one, but
Do you want to take this inspection report and, ask for any repairs from this? It's a tricky little thing. I'm sure that the listing agent's trying to pull is now you know all the things and now you can't ask for anything. I wouldn't advise unless they're going to take that report and then you write in the contract, buyers will accept seller's previous home inspection report, but they are not agreeing to the as is. So we can just work that out in additional terms then. Let's see, where are we at? Okay, so then the next step obviously is to prepare and negotiate your ROC. Most contracts, most purchase agreements also have a built-in ROC, so it's not 100% required to do the release of contingency, even if they're not asking for repairs. You can, it doesn't matter either way. Then monitor the financing and then appraisal. This is where I got ahead of myself. And making sure that the appraisal got ordered, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, you want to make sure that happened. You'll see I put in here, not after inspections, and I underline that. Nothing makes me more agitated in a transaction when I find out that the buyer's lender didn't order the appraisal because whether it was the buyer's idea, the buyer's agent's idea, or sometimes the lender's idea. Oh, I don't want my client to waste $500 on an appraisal if they can't come to terms on the inspection. Those are words that I've actually heard from a lender before. And I had to say, stay out of my real estate transaction. You do your job, I'll do my job. You don't get to say that. Our contract says make loan application and all the things that implies, which is ordering the appraisal. Unless they state otherwise, and they say appraisal to be ordered after negotiation of a home inspection, it should be ordered immediately. Imagine that everybody waits till after the inspections are done and the reports come back. We could be 2 to 3 weeks in if we need to get, estimates on things. Appraisal should be ordered immediately. One has nothing to do with the other. I understand why buyers could be like, well, I don't want to spend the money on it in case we can't, come to terms on the inspection. I am sorry, you would be breaching their contract if you don't do it. I hate to say it's too bad, but it kind of is too bad. Any position on that, Matt?
I mean, I'm aligned to that.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's exactly what we see most times.
Yeah, I mean, it could take a week, but once it's ordered, and then another week for it to come back. So you've got 2 weeks right there. And if you're already 5 days in, we're at week 3.
Yeah.
And then it's got to go to underwriter. There's no way to have this be closed on time. And you certainly don't want to have to tell the listing agent to tell their seller that we're delayed now for closing because they didn't order the appraisal in time. So keep that in mind. And again, you're responsible for that even if you represent the seller. Tracking the status. So if you're a buyer's agent, making sure you're in communication with the listing agent and vice versa throughout the whole transaction. Seeing if the lender needs anything else from you. What's your position on the copy of the ROC?
So, meaning, do we want to see it?
Mm,
We usually request,
yeah,
usually like, you don't want the underwriter to ask it and not have it.
yeah,
You know, it depends on the underwriter really, so we just get it.
yeah.
And use it as needed.
And so also this question's come up lately. We absolutely don't send the home inspection to the lender. That is not going to the lender. Whether it goes to the seller is also subjective. If I'm representing a seller and someone's writing a release of contingency with repairs, I'd like to at least see the pages pertaining to those things. It's also in the best interest of your buyer that we have clarity around specifically what is wrong so we can get it fixed. Be real careful on how you write this release of contingency. It has to say seller will do the following, not just list number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I like to notate the page of the inspection as well so that we can get clarity around what we're asking for. Sometimes people fix things that they thought and interpreted that you were asking for because you weren't specific. You don't even have to be too specific as long as you include the pages of the report or the whole report and notate page 57 or whatever, right? So be real clear about that so we don't have those issues. Making sure that the repairs got done, whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent, when are they getting done? Who did them? Let's make sure it's a professional, and can I have a copy of the invoices? I had a situation last year where my seller was a licensed electrician. Actually, he owned and taught the school to electricians. So when he needed some updates on his own electrical box, he was extremely pissed off about it because he was like, why would I need to do these things? I teach the electricians. But they wanted it, and it was like a $200 repair. So he did it himself. And he's legally able, but the buyers didn't like it. When we couldn't provide an invoice from someone who did it, that was a professional, they then needed an electrician to come back and check it over to make sure it was done correctly. We don't want our sellers, unless it's something like painting some peeling paint or something, we don't want them installing their own radon mitigation systems. That's also happened to me before too. It didn't even save them that much money, and it was a disaster. So be specific, by a licensed professional. Unless, of course, it's something where, like a landscape issue, you need dirt brought in to, fill the backfill the foundation or something like that. So be real clear on how you write those. And of course, you can always run them past me. Sometimes when value doesn't come in on the appraisal, we can do a couple of things. We can renegotiate the price. We can split the difference. It's not just necessarily a deal killer, depending on if the appraisal, killed the financing for the buyer. If it didn't kill the financing for the buyer, let's say they're putting 25% down and they don't need to put 25% down per their approval, then it's not going to fall under their financing contingency. That means they have the ability to be able to come up with some money to bridge that gap. Most of the time we negotiate that and we say, let's all be reasonable here. You take off this amount, the buyer will take a portion out of their down payment or bring some additional funds to make up that gap. So there's a lot of ways around, crunching that appraisal gap, right? Also, sometimes in multiple offers, the buyer put in an appraisal gap, which meant they're okay paying over appraised value. We're not necessarily saying this is what you should do. It's up to them to do that. That's their responsibility, but I would definitely be covering my butt on that one and putting it in an email to them as a, let me understand that you're okay with this appraisal gap for future reasons. And then negotiating different things like certain repairs that need to be done per the appraisal, if it should happen. When you represent a seller, the seller is not getting a copy of the appraisal. You're not getting a copy of the appraisal. We only get a copy of the appraisal if there's a problem. So, by the way, even as the buyer's agent, we don't get a copy of the appraisal unless there's a problem with value or repairs. The only people that get that appraisal is the lender and the buyer. Unless we need to see it, then we don't even ask for it. Now it also is a good time to get into Dotloop if you've not done this, and then go into command and make sure that you are creating your opportunity. If you have not done this before, you're going to reach out to Amanda and she's going to walk you through how to do that. We've recently had 2 agents I hate to say in the past like 10 days, who didn't do their opportunity. And even though I refer them to this document, it tends to happen to people who don't come to class ever, right? Their closing happened, we got the check. And they couldn't get paid and they didn't understand why. They never did an opportunity. They didn't submit compliance. They didn't do their commission. We don't just magically get a check and then pay people. That has to be done. And I don't do it for them. Amanda doesn't do it for them, but she walks them through it. So you need to make sure you understand how to do that. And if you don't know how to do it, you need a tech meeting with Amanda to show you how. A lot of people will wait until they have something under contract because, you know, she can show you today, and then in 3 months from now, when you have a closing, you don't remember, and that's okay. You could wait, but do not wait to try to get her on the schedule till 2 days before closing. Do it early on. You can always make an adjustment if it doesn't appraise and we need to make changes to it. Okay. So get that done as soon as you can. Next step, title work and steps for moving forward towards the closing. Making sure that the lender has gotten the clear to close. We can't clear to close. We can't close without the clear to close. So that a clear to close would be when Matt calls us and says, good news, congratulations, it came back through underwriting and we've got clear to close. Documents then go from the lender to the title company to prepare those docs for signing, and the title company is going to call and schedule with buyer and seller. If you want to be part of that scheduling because you don't want it sprung on you, you need to let the title company know, I plan to attend my closing, whether it's a buyer or seller. I recommend going when you can. It's certainly not required. Your presence there is for moral support and kind of usually the final thing you're doing with them besides exchanging keys. It's not required. There's nothing that you're bringing. There's nothing you need to do in preparation. If you want to bring a closing gift or some kind of closing packet, that would be a good time to do it. But they'll bypass you and schedule with the client if you don't say, hey, please let me know a couple of times so I can also try to be there. That makes sense. The only thing your buyers and sellers need to be bringing to closing is their driver's license for one, and then proceeds and loan amount, down payment funds, wiring. So a couple of things are going to happen with the wire. When it's a seller, we need to have wiring instructions, not we, the title company needs wiring instructions from your seller to where they want the proceeds to go. This is why we have the anti-fraud document. It says that we've explained to them that it's not in the wire itself that the money could get stolen because that's protected. It's in the email exchanges of giving wiring instructions. And someone has hacked into your email. They've taken that wiring instructions and then they put their own account in there. That's how it happens. So I don't recommend that they start transferring wiring instructions back and forth with the title company in an email. So what they need to do, and what I did when I sold my house and when I bought a house, was I went to my bank, Huntington as it turns out, and said, I need wiring instructions into my money market account because I want the proceeds from my house to go there. I went there, they physically gave me a piece of paper that had those wiring instructions on it. I physically took that to the title company and said, this is where I want my funds wired. No one's hacking that. There is no mistake happening there. And the opposite for the buyer. I want the wiring instructions to be handed to me as a buyer from the title company. And then I'm going to physically take those wiring instructions to my bank and say, hey, Huntington, I want you to wire $50,000 or whatever it is to this account at the title company. That is the safest way to do it. It's not the only way, but it is the safest way. And that's what I try to explain to my clients. If they're like, but we live in Florida, I can't hand deliver anything. Don't do it for them. You don't want to be the one who hands it over something that got messed up. Then they can call the title company or they can make other arrangements to figure out how we're doing the wiring. Okay. They're not going to get a check. There's an amount they can give a check for, but it typically isn't happening. Wiring is how those funds are going to go back and forth. Other things is if you need to schedule a final walkthrough with your buyer, our contract does say that they're allowed to do a final walkthrough within so many hours before closing. You should do it. I think it's highly recommended. They do a walkthrough. A couple things could happen. This is your chance to go make sure repairs got done like they said. Just because they gave you an invoice doesn't mean it was done how you expected. I've done a final walkthrough before where the seller already had moved to Texas and the house was vacant for 2 weeks and the hot water heater leaked all over the basement floor. So the second we stepped down that bottom step, thankfully it was summertime and we all had flip-flops on, there was this much water on the basement floor from the hot water heater. That would never have been found. Imagine the buyer moves in on moving day and sees that. So then that needed to get addressed before we could close. So that's why we schedule and do the final walkthrough. Not required, but it is something that's highly suggested. Coordinating the time for the inspection, as the closing, as I had said. Again, at that point, we're making sure all the repairs have been made, get receipts and all of those things. This is also something that's very important. When you're representing the seller, please tell them, do not shut the utilities off. Do not. Take them out of your name for the possession day. So let's talk about possession. If it's immediate possession, that means when the deed records, that doesn't mean they're getting keys at closing. There's no one getting keys at closing. You're not really considered closed until the deed records the county recorder's office. So like our title company e-files. So it's probably going to happen the same day unless everybody signed at 4 PM or something, right? And it also depends on how many closings they've had and what's going on at the county recorder's office. If it's a holiday or something and they're not open, it's not happening that day. Also know the counties, like I believe it's Wayne County, their county recorders are only open 3 days a week. So if you're signing on Monday evening and they're closed Tuesday, Wednesday, and don't quote me on that, I don't know what days they're open and closed, but then it could maybe not record until Thursday. So you need to know those things. And so the utilities come out of the seller's name for the day of key transfer, possession. If there's, let's say, 5 days, 30 days, doesn't really matter of possession time, this is how you start to count those days. It's not 5 days after I signed, it's 5 days after the deed records. I try to avoid Friday closings because then you lose those 2 days. If it doesn't record on Friday, it's not going to record till Monday. And if Monday's Martin Luther King Day, it's not recording till Tuesday. It's really hard to get to your buyer to understand that they just lost a whole weekend that they thought they were moving. So I try to avoid Friday closings or making sure that both the buyer and the seller are signing very early on Friday so that there's no running of risk. If we're in, Stark County and we're dealing with American Title, it's probably going to file that day unless there's some hiccup with the wire, with the funds from the lending or whatever. There's no guarantee there. But remember, day one, if there's possession time, is from the day the deed records. Now count your days from there. That's when utilities should be coming out of the seller's name and going into the buyers. So when representing a buyer, it's your responsibility as the agent to reach out to the listing agent and say, can you provide the utility companies? Don't assume they're just giving it to you. Ask for it. Same with making arrangements of how the keys are going to get transferred. Hey, listing agent, are you just going to leave the key in the lockbox so I can go over and get it? It's the buyer's agent's responsibility to find out how they're going to get the keys and how they're going to get them to their client. Listing agent could have went over and picked up their sign and lockbox already, and now they have the key sitting at their front desk of their office. So keep that in mind. And so is there a class happening in here?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wrap up here soon. So make those arrangements, and like it was Drew, I believe, who had a situation this past winter where the seller did turn the gas and electric off versus just taking it out of their name. And it was, 22 below zero out, no heat. And the gas company, like they thankfully went out there that night and got it turned on, but imagine that they didn't. And then imagine we have freezing pipes. Sellers should not be taking those out of their name. I'm sorry, getting them shut off. It's taking them out of their name. However, here's what's going to happen. If your buyer doesn't call the utility companies and say, put them in my name, and the seller just simply said, take them out of my name, if there's no one's name to put them in, they will shut them off. So it's a responsibility on both sides. Making sure whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agents, everybody's clear about what's happening with the utilities. Make sense? All right. Attending the closing, bringing a packet, like just like how we have marketing packets, you can put together a nice little thank you listing packet where you ask for referrals. In there could also be a printed copy of all the paperwork for their records if you want to do that. And that's also a nice time to give a gift if you're doing gifts. Another time with a buyer might be when you do the key exchange. That's completely up to you and certainly not required. I always send a thank you card then afterwards. I'm not typically strangely giving a gift to my seller. I'm usually doing that to a buyer, but that's entirely up to you. Always a thank you card in some way. Add them to your CRM, add them into Command now as a past client. Get them set on a past client smart plan where you're reminded of their anniversary of buying the house every year. It's a great touch, right? Can you believe it's been a year kind of a thing? Don't hesitate to ask for referrals. They're excited because they sold their house, or they're excited because they bought a house. That's your greatest chance to get a referral from them. I created this checklist for you all. So please print these, or you know what? It did print. So anyone here, go ahead and you can take the whole PowerPoint and the checklist back there in the back of the room. But this is your checklist. This is everything that you need to do. I've got it broken down in categories. It doesn't mean that there could be some extra things that happen. Every transaction is very different. And there, I mean, if it's cash, some of these things aren't going to happen, right? So it's not a rigid list of this is what has to happen. But mostly everything on here is happening. And in this list is just, I compiled everything that was in the PowerPoint and put it in a nice checklist. So I know there's another class in here in 4 minutes, so let's go ahead and stop share and see what questions you guys have, if any. If on Zoom, just unmute yourself and dive in.
No questions, just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Go
I
ahead.
have a unique question. So whenever we bought my house, we kind of have a problem with transferring utilities. So we have a PO box. We technically live in Canton, Ohio, but it's like a sub little city of Middle Branch, Ohio. Is that something that the seller and the listing agent would disclose? Like whenever I go to sell my house, is that something that I
Yeah, I mean, because they need an explanation about that, right?
he had to text? So my agent Chris, he had to text the neighbor because he's related to my neighbor.
Okay.
And he's like, no, everybody has PO boxes on that street, so we don't have mailboxes. So I just wondered if that was.
Cluster, you're saying you have a cluster box.
No, we have to go to a post office.
Oh, okay.
It's
Gotcha.
very confusing.
I mean, I don't know, that's not really a question on the property disclosure, but yeah, when your house goes under contract, I would make sure they know, hey, there's no mailbox at the curb. This is where you got to go get your mail.
So we went.
And here's the key. Because like when I sold my house, we did in that neighborhood have cluster boxes. So I actually put together a spreadsheet for the buyer who bought my house, like a 5-page spreadsheet of everything they needed to know about the house, including here's the key for the mailbox and its number, whichever, right? So yeah, I think that's just a nice courtesy for the seller to do for the buyer. Like I'm going to be listing this house and they have a pool, and the seller asked me, how will I explain all the details of this system? It's a really complicated saltwater system, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, type it up and leave it on the kitchen counter. And he's like, well, I kind of want to walk the buyer through and tell him, well, we'll come to that. We haven't even listed the house yet. We're getting ahead of ourselves, you know? But yeah, sometimes sellers want to walk, like I had someone who had like, solar panels on their garage. That was a complicated system that's run to batteries in their basement. So he did meet with the buyers and explain that. So like, there's a lot of different variables there. Other questions, guys?
Say one thing, Gina, is that I walked out about the closing part. So if you guys are attending your closings, please tell the lender. Because we want to attend them with you.
Okay, good point.
And it's to Gina's point, it's the most exciting part of the transaction. Everyone is happy.
Yeah.
There are a lot of easy ways for you to ask for business and not look like you're asking for business.
Yes,
As well as it's just a fun send off.
it is. Don't drop the ball at the end. Exactly. I mean, it can't always happen. I'm not gonna let my calendar interfere with the closing. We need you to get your keys, and just because I'm not in town today, I'm not gonna interfere and say we gotta do it on Tuesday. But it's just a good opportunity to have that last kind of thank you.
Yeah.
And by the way, listing closings take like 10 minutes. Buyer closings, they're going pretty fast lately, 30 minutes maybe. If you've got someone who asks lots of questions and reads everything, you know, a little longer. All right, guys, thanks so much.
Thanks, Gina.